Welcome back, everyone. We've got our first speaker duo for this conference presenting after this. So, how about that? We've got Alex and Lauren. A little bit about Alex. This is interesting. Alex had never had a sunburn in his life until once he got an ear infection in Hawaii and had to take antibiotics. And the next day, his entire leg turned purple. He drove an inflatable hot tub across the US-Canada border in the middle of the pandemic for questionable reasons. It sounds like a little bit of a next Adam Sandler movie, to be honest. But he accidentally got LASIK while unsedated, and his dog once ran partway up to Mount Rushmore. So that's Alex for you, and Lauren. Lauren works as a data analyst, supporting marketing, content, and developer advocacy teams. She currently lives in San Diego, California, with her two dogs, Olive and Sage. She enjoys watching the sunset and long walks on the beach. So please welcome Alex and Lauren. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll be the straight man for this talk, if anyone's wondering. Our talk is called Doing Data-Driven Content Maintenance. My name's Alex Garnett. I'm currently Senior Docs Editor at Assembly AI. It's my former colleague, Lauren Kiss.
Hello.
And we're going to talk to you about some work we did together earlier this year and last. Maintenance is hard, right? We all know maintenance is challenging. It's hard to motivate, it's hard to justify, and it's hard to find the time to do it properly. Whether you're Magic Mike, out there in the Florida sun trying to fix a roof, it costs time and money. It doesn't always produce something new, and it requires continuity. You have to know what you're maintaining, why, and what you're trying to get out of it. How do we get maintenance right? If you currently search on Hacker News for refactoring, which in code speak is basically like, I'm going to rewrite this code, I'm going to improve something that is technically already working so it can work better or accommodate new features, be more maintainable, you get a lot of horror stories, or at least cautionary tales. We see refactoring for maintainability, refactoring versus defactoring. Defactoring sounds worse. Refactoring wars and how to avoid them, not good. A short cautionary tale, still pretty bad. That coworker who never stops refactoring. Refactoring yourself out of business. Refactoring versus just changing crap. There's some negativity here, right? You can see there are some potential pitfalls that we all want to talk about. And for the record, I know we're all writers, documentarians here, but I like to talk interchangeably about code examples and writing examples, so there's going to be a lot of that in this talk. Also want to shout out this community called the Maintainers. They're, I know around in academic circles, really great community organized around doing maintenance. Whether you have a grant-funded project with no runway at the end of it, or you're a long-suffering open source maintainer who is, working on curl in their basement, and if your basement collapses, nobody has curl anymore, it's nice to make sure that we have continuity around these things, right? Like being able to ensure that you have a path away from what you're doing is really important. So whether you're talking about right to repair, maintenance is really interesting and really important.
So we'll be covering a few things today. We'll begin by outlining the context for you all. So what our library looks like, who are the people who are maintaining this library, and what the workflows and some of the tools that we used previously, what that looks like. Then we'll jump into our data, covering the methodology behind defining and measuring our maintenance efforts before moving into some example data views to demonstrate how one might actually view our methods in action. Finally, we'll close with the outcome, the quantitative and qualitative insights that we have to share with you all. So, starting with the context.
So the content library that we're talking about, as we mentioned, this is a former employer we both used to work for, not a current employer. Will remain nameless, don't guess, or you can guess later. This content library had multiple different content types. There was in-house content, produced by our team of in-house writers. There was external content that was selected, curated, and edited by our external editorial team. Then there was acquired content, which would come from larger acquisitions if we rolled up, say, an entire blog of articles and wanted to incorporate those. We're going to be talking mostly about the first two categories here. We're going to be drawing some subtle distinctions for maintenance of those first two categories, but just to give you a heads up, content comes in multiple different ways. We had dedicated writers and dedicated editors. That'll be important later on.
So starting with KPIs, or key performance indicators. These are critical to measuring anything. It's important to keep in mind what you're intending to do with your work. Are you trying to help users be successful on your products? So, the goal of retention, if we're talking about a marketing funnel, or introduce them to additional products, or help them with new use cases. So cross-sell or upsell, sticking with that marketing language there. In our case, we were positioned at the top of the marketing funnel. So our goal was brand awareness. How can we introduce users to our brand, our nameless brand, and create positive associations without necessarily trying to sell these users on the product? Whatever it may be, ensure that your measurement for success, your KPI, is aligned to what you're seeking to accomplish with your content program. When initially evaluating our maintenance program, we found that we were performing maintenance for two different reasons. We were either maintaining because it was a high traffic, high performing piece that was becoming out of date, or we were maintaining a piece of content because it was going to be relevant to a newly published piece we were working on. So we termed these opportunistic maintenance and tech debt maintenance respectively.
The maintenance process differed a little bit for opportunistic and for tech debt maintenance, and this too is a really important distinction to how we did our maintenance. For our opportunistic maintenance, we had an automatic script running that would identify high-performing articles that hadn't been updated in at least 18 months. For this, we used a tool called Looker to gather metrics, but anything that you're running that can gather metrics, Posthog could do it, a lot of different things could do it. Automated process, filing that list for us. This is a really popular article and it hasn't gotten a look in a while. It could use a look. That would add to our maintenance queue in Jira. And then within that Jira, again, we had a big team, both of writers and of editors. We could prioritize by expertise which of those older articles needed a look, who was best qualified to give them that look, and then how much of a look they needed. This was really nice because it gave our writers and editors the opportunity to exercise judgment. As we became more familiar with our own library, you'd see similar content coming up. We had an idea of what was high performing. So as we're undertaking our maintenance, becoming more familiar with our own content library, becoming more familiar with our colleagues' expertise, and we're able to share that around in a really effective way. So just by having that maintenance process running, we got a lot better at doing every part of our job. We would then go into the CMS, find how the content looked, figure out if it was a really old piece that was just very sticky SEO-wise but didn't follow our more recent style guide, needed a whole rewrite, or if a lot had changed since it was first written. If we had a lot of really fundamental Linux content and it predated Kubernetes, you go in, you want to sort of touch that up. You figure out how much it needs, whether it's a survey piece or an in-depth tutorial. But this was fun work, figuring out how old something was, what had changed, and why are people still reading it, but what is it also missing? For tech debt maintenance, that process was even more of a judgment call. That was even more writer's discretion. In this case, while we were going back and editing those pieces that were surfaced automatically, or while we were writing new pieces, we might have an idea like, hey, we could use a dedicated piece on Nginx reverse proxying. Everybody loves a reverse proxy, right? Who loves reverse proxies? That was way more than I expected. Thank you so much. You're a great audience. But we'd want to have that in a dedicated article. And you'd want to make sure that dedicated article was also up to snuff and following our tip-top style guide. So we'd go through, pull out that reverse proxying content into a standalone piece, make sure that's topped up. So that's still maintenance, but it's maintenance that came out of our technical debt, not automated metrics. And when you're doing something without metrics, you always have to be cautious about the value of it. And so being able to balance this opportunistic data-driven process against this more tech debt-driven process empowered our writers and editors, and it also let us mix quantitative and qualitative evaluation in a way that was really useful for us. Oh no! It's Quincy's qualitative quarter! I don't know if anybody watched too much Pee-wee's Playhouse as a kid, but I tend to feel that whenever you're giving a talk, you should also have like lovable animal characters just popping in to interrupt. And also, this was always a very quantitative, metrics-driven, data-driven talk, so I wanted to add a character who could give qualitative insights. And sometimes when you're searching for stock image, you see corn with glasses. I'm not going to do that whole, I think I'm going to kill the sound guy if I keep doing that voice, so I'm not going to do that. But just some nice qualitative insights from this process. Having small editing tasks to fit into your work schedule is really nice when you're a writer. You're not always committed to trying to get one big bear of a piece out the door. Having small stuff you can work on to stay productive, stay focused, and get adjacent ideas out is really, really nice. So from a pure work point of view, we loved this process. Constantly creating that new content's a big commitment. This is less of one. Dedicating regular time to maintenance makes your writing go more smoothly because you're able to reuse smaller pieces of content, you're able to get more ideas, and you're able to think about your content in a nice hypertextual way. You know, we're using the internet for what it's made for. We're linking out to different pieces, we're building that library, we're building those adjacent connections. So we are quantitatively proud of this process, but not just that. Thanks to Quincy! So we have this great process, but do we have buy-in? And again, going back to Magic Mike working on that house, you know, like funding changes, expectations around maintenance change, expectations around how we're using our time would also change. It would change year to year. You know, we did find ourselves having conversation like, this is how much time we're spending on our maintenance, here's the value it delivers. And frankly, skepticism in this area is justified. Like, we should have to back this up. It's totally okay for us to have KPIs for why we're going back and editing an article from 2016. That's not new content. People like new content. You know, everybody wants new content, like Netflix, like new shows, forget your old shows. We have to go back and we have to justify it. So defaulting skepticism here makes sense. It probably took, I would say, 25% of our time in total, which is a lot. So how do we show value from this? Great question. Time for part 2, the data.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, so getting into the method of measuring our maintenance efforts. The first thing to determine is the KPI. What are we planning to measure success against? In our case, this was traffic volume or monthly visitors, again, since we were focused on brand awareness, introducing people to the brand, to the website, and the content. Next, we needed to define how we would view success. Rather than use a binary success metric of successful or not, we opted to have 3 categories: failure, neutral, or successful, which we'll cover more in the next slide. Since we opted to have 3 categories rather than that binary success metric, we needed one more component, a representative value to anchor our efforts against. We selected the median as it's less impacted by outliers in our data, and content can have a lot of outliers, as compared to the popular mean or average. So looking at our 3 categories that we've defined for measuring success. For each piece of content maintained, we viewed the monthly visitor volume for the 3 months prior to maintenance and the 3 months after maintenance. We did disregard the month of maintenance itself, so we're only looking at complete months of data. When we compare these 2 windows of time to each other, if the post 3-month window of traffic is a decrease in volume from the pre-3-month window of traffic, that would be considered a fail. Our next category, neutral, is when the post window is greater than 0%, so we did see an increase in traffic, but it is less than 30%, which is where our median comes into play. And then our final category here is successful, so where our maintenance efforts beat the median and produced a greater than 30% lift in traffic. We were fortunate in not having variables in our data that can create spikes, such as a paid budget, for example. Had that been the case, we would have opted to measure just organic traffic anyway, in order to try to create consistency among the data. Okay, so this first view is the high-level data. So if you needed to talk to an exec or organization owners and tell them how your maintenance program is faring, this is the kind of view that you'd want. So what we're able to say here is that 53% of our maintenance efforts are successful. And with that, we have generated an additional 1.2 million in traffic or monthly visitors to our content and therefore our site. So this is really a view that you can use to just cover the program overall, very high level, not as much insights in this view, but it will just give that baseline to whoever you need to talk to about justifying the maintenance program. So going a level deeper, here we can start to split out the outcomes by maintenance type. So in this case, we're looking first at tech debt maintenance. For both of these charts, they are stacked bar charts, colored by what ended up happening in case of the success or failure or neutral category, with the x-axis being the month in which maintenance occurred. So on the left, we're looking at the count of content pieces we've maintained, so our team's output. And then on the right, we have our incremental traffic from our neutral and successful pieces, so the outcome from our team's efforts. We're able to see in this view that our tech debt maintenance has been largely successful, and this really attests to the power of SEO and our interlinking efforts and how successful our legacy content has been. Looking at our opportunistic maintenance next, so same exact views as before, we do still have those counts on the left, incremental traffic on the right, and we are able to see a lot more variability in our opportunistic maintenance, so you see a lot more failures in this case as well. And there are a number of reasons this could be, especially within your own programs. One of the things that we wanted to highlight is timing and relevance. So something can become really popular for a short bit of time. So for example, Mastodon last November, which could really impact the situation here. So suddenly we have Mastodon pieces that are open for opportunistic maintenance, and that dies off really quickly as people realize they're not as interested in Mastodon as they thought they were. So even evergreen content can experience these surges in popularity and be trending for periods of time. Okay, so this is an example of a more detailed view. So drilling in another level deep. In this case, we're looking at piece by piece what our maintenance outcomes were. So we're able to see the title for these pieces, the maintained month, what kind of maintenance type it was, and then the outcomes in terms of traffic, and overall success, neutral or fail. So here we have a piece that we maintained in March of 2020, tech debt maintenance, how to cut your own bangs. March of 2020 was a time. In this case, we did see that it was wildly successful. So, that pre-3-month window only had 5,000 views to this piece. But, in the 3 months following March of 2020, we gained an additional 40,000 viewers to this page. Really fantastic. Our next piece here is how to build your own motorized tricycle. May of 2020, getting creative here. This was an opportunistic piece for us, and this one was actually a failure. So we did not see more visitors to this page after that 3-month window as compared to before. We also have how to start a cooking YouTube channel. So June of 2020, getting into the kitchen here. This was also an opportunistic piece that was successful with incremental traffic of 19,000 monthly visitors. Next up was how to extinguish a kitchen fire, which was neutral. So this is a piece of content that seems to be fairly consistent even after our maintenance efforts. Everyone needs to know how to extinguish kitchen fire. And then our final piece here, for example, is how to avoid liability for fire damage. So tech debt maintenance as well. And we did see this one was wildly successful, incremental lift of about 16,000 visitors here. So this is just an example of how you can view individual pieces to start to get a level deeper with your insights here. Your own program can have a lot more detail than this. For example, if you include any metadata relevant to these. So looking at this, if we were to have tags involved, for example, I might be able to say that pieces involving fire tend to perform a little bit better, or kitchens, or kitchen fire specifically. Anything having to do with doing your own hair seems to be doing well. Whereas, creative opportunities such as tricycles, not quite as much. So really add the data that you need in order to start to create actionable insights off of this. Looking at this page, I would say, Alex, we've got to do some more work on these fire pieces. We've got to get in the kitchen.
A lot of lawyers need jobs, a lot of new technical writers. We need more in here.
And finally, we're going to end with the same view that we've seen before, except this time, instead of looking at those two different types, we are just looking at it together. So coming back to this overall program view of our maintenance efforts. So again, what is the count of maintenance that we're doing, and then the incremental traffic that we're seeing from that. And now we dive into the outcome.
Thank you. And just to be clear, it's very liberating to make up synthetic data for a former employer. You get to make up fun article titles. I highly recommend it. So some important takeaways here. Maintenance is not a loss leader. We never, ever want to find ourselves framing maintenance as a loss leader. We want to tie that back to our funnel metrics. We want to make sure that it's valued exactly the same way as new writing is. It's always fair game to evaluate whether you're using the right top of funnel metrics or if those top of funnel metrics bear out further down in your funnel as conversions. Like evaluation is great. You should always be evaluating at the same time as you are trying to motivate your maintenance. We were not tied directly to conversions as we did this work. That's an important caveat. But we were committed to maintaining the content that we exist for mind share and for market share and for our own pride in our work. Doing this maintenance keeps our current and our former writers engaged. As I mentioned, some of these were external contributions. Those external authors really want to keep liking us the same way we do, right? Like you want to make sure everybody's proud of the work we're doing and we can keep folks in the loop and keep engaged. Really, really important. So some takeaways from this work.
Evaluation can and should be iterative. Reevaluate as needed. If you find that you consistently have 90% failures, you might be setting yourself up against the wrong metrics.
Maintaining old content is far quicker than publishing new content and fun, and it balances the work so nicely.
Evaluation doesn't just need to be informative, it can be actionable, especially with additional data points like what we discussed with our kitchen fire example.
There's no one rule about when to archive, de-index, or update older pieces. In doing this work, I would have conversations at times with folks who would say, well, we know that content's got a shelf life of 3 years, then it begins to decay. I don't believe in that rule. That's averaged out to the point of meaninglessness in many cases. Like, a lot of our content is sticky, a lot of it is not. And as a writer, as an editor, you want to be able to go in, be experienced, be knowledgeable about your own library, and make that call.
Aim for alignment between what you measure and the KPIs that your team or organization are held to, especially if you're in the situation where you need to prove the value of your program. Make sure that the language that you're using to talk about your measurement for success is the language that the execs or organization owners want to hear.
If you know and trust your whole library, you can do a lot more with it. You can link between different pieces. I actually think many of us, like even though we're all writing on the internet, are underlinking in many cases in our content libraries. It's a strange thing to point out because it's not 1994 and we all kind of know how hypertext works. But I do think it's something that like stands to be talked about more. Like we can create more value, we can make stickier content by making it more adjacent, more adjacency, more connectivism.
I don't know how many people in here are actually analysts, but if you're an analyst who's not a technical writer, partner with your writers, partner closely with them. They will have insights into the data that you're reading that you're not aware of. They are the subject matter experts, and they will be able to tell you even more about what you're looking at.
You should also always try to have a great metrics colleague as a writer who can show off your work and present with you at Write the Docs. It's very nice. Oh, I'm back! I get the final word. You haven't seen the last of me. I'm going to break the microphone again. Our style guide changed a lot over time, as I mentioned. So as we were going back to revise older articles, sometimes it was for relevance and for, like a good scan of the current state of the art. Sometimes it was for style. Both changes were worth making, and as you find yourself like revising your style, that goes back into style guide maintenance. It's all circular. Like having the chance to review this work, as long as it's piecemeal and as long as it all like factors into different parts of the work, it's all valuable and it helps you develop more expertise in what you're doing. A lot of those older pieces built this content library's reputation, but if you go back and read it, you see how many ways you can improve it. And it's always nice to realize that, like what was good enough at one point can still get a lot better. Sometimes they're very small and quick changes, right? Like sometimes you'll find an older article that's got tremendous SEO, but has really bizarre turns of phrase in it. I don't know if you've gone back and like read your own writing that somehow snuck through from like 2014. And you'd be like, oh, Nginx is the most spectacular of all web servers, and it will defeat all your horrible nightmares. You're like, what the? No, this is weird. Like you can go back. It's always nice to edit stuff again. And being empowered to make and track those changes makes a huge difference. I keep saying that, but this really is about empowerment, to know your library and to keep working on it and to not just think of pieces as done when they're published. Thank you. That's, I think, us. That's it for us.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you for the laughter. And it's a pleasure speaking with you all.
All right. I love your impersonations, man. That was really good.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no complaints from me. Cool. So yeah, thank you for that talk. That was really good. And data is one of those things that's just so hard to get sometimes. Like, I don't want to sound all pessimistic, but I know a lot of organizations recently have let go of people like UX researchers, which is, I don't know. That's where all this data-driven maintenance comes from. So that's the core of it. But anyway, I'll get into the question. So one of the things you mentioned was the prioritization of content or your maintenance schedules based on what data you were seeing. So it's so important. What surprised you in the data when you started using it to plan your maintenance? Is there any sort of surprises there?
That's a terrific question. So we would find that spiky traffic historically had a bunch of weird shapes to it. Like, for example, if you look at 2014, 2016, 2018 or so, like that was when there was still a lot of enthusiasm around bare metal Linux and like brand new VPS installs, and like everybody was still getting really excited about like, let's ship Ubuntu, like let's ship a brand new web server. And in the past 5 years, you've seen a lot more abstraction layers take off, where whether it's serverless, Lambda, something like that, we're getting a little bit further away from bare metal in terms of what content perform really well.
Yep.
And we wanted to make sure we could strike a balance there, because we know that the bare metal stuff is still more introductory for many people, for many contexts. Like you want to be able to stand up your own web server, but you also want to make sure that you're teaching people how to work the way people are working now. And so trying to make sure you're covering off both bases and actually seeing how longitudinal it was in practice was really interesting.
Yeah, so would you then say in addition to the data, you were also looking at trends and sort of making a little bit of a judgment call there?
Definitely. There was like a historiography to it in a weird way, because I mean, like the open source documentation world has changed so much in the past 15 years. Like if you sort of plot out the entire AWS era, so to speak, you can see, how many new products they've introduced and what's done well and what we're all familiar with offhand. Like that's changed a lot. And seeing that was also really educational.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So I've got a question here about, and this is I guess would be pretty common to a large number of the audience. I'm a one-person documentation team that has a huge maintenance backlog. What advice do you have for getting out of a big maintenance hole?
I would say just look at the data, really take the time to determine how much of that maintenance actually should be performed, start to measure what impact it's having by performing that maintenance. If you're not seeing a lot of incremental gains, that might be a signal to you to focus more on publishing those new pieces as compared to doing that maintenance work. And then again, just get to that piece-by-piece view within the maintenance itself in order to start prioritizing some of those pieces to dig yourself out of that hole.
Thank you.
And 2 people is a lot more than one person on a team, just speaking for this presentation, but also generally, it's nice to have big teams. I think a lot of this work worked because we had bigger teams, and it makes me want bigger teams more in my work.
So in your talk, I think you also mentioned a little bit about the pre and post evaluation, you've sort of covered both ends of that spectrum. So when content was updated, were you highlighting them to users again, like promoting them on social, or curious if there were any other efforts tied to increasing that traffic?
No, that's a fantastic question. And in our case, siloed is not the right word for it, but we were not leveraging social accounts or anything like that. So we were focused on a more community focused site. So in our case, we did not have the resources to do that kind of promotion. But if you are doing that, definitely take that into account as it will skew your metrics.
Okay, so just more organic, but then if you've got a plan for that, you sort of plan for that then. Yeah,
Exactly.
Okay. And any tips for doing this kind of evaluation when your visitor numbers are significantly lower than what you showed in your examples? That's a great follow-on question. By the way.
It is. We used a randomizer, I will admit, and it was giving us some really exciting data. I have to say, if that was the case with some of our actual pieces, I would have been over the roof. I would say definitely just, again, if you can anchor to something like the median, start to get a feeling for what your data actually looks like, and really set yourself up for success by choosing a metric that aligns to you. Our 15,000 is not going to be the case for a number of libraries, so take the time to look at all of the data that you have and start to choose metrics that make sense, and goals and stretch goals that make sense in that case.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Now, when you did mention this is more from just general content or the type of content you were actually producing. Do you have any resources you could recommend to maybe technical writers who want to do more quantitative data analysis and not so much rely on the qualitative side of things?
That is a fantastic question that I don't know how to answer.
That's fine. We can come back again. We know where you are, so we can find you. So,
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have any resources readily prepared. I think that in our case we were learning as we went. You're absolutely welcome to email me as a resource. But at this time I don't have anything that I would recommend externally. But if anybody else has anything, please drop it into the Write for Docs or the Slack group if you can. Share anything that you have with the entire community.
Okay, no worries. Do you have any, I'm conscious of the time, but I think we've got a couple of questions. What strategies do you recommend for small teams? I know you mentioned 2 is better than 1, but small teams with no analysts that have to fight many stakeholders for maintenance, buy-in.
I would say, generally speaking, find a way that you can show value for your maintenance. If you don't currently have quantitative metrics, it's not going to kill you to get some. However you do that is up to you, and it's going to depend on circumstance. But don't be too proud to have data. As a writer, I am very proud, and I like to have fights for no reason. But it's always nice to do less of that to try to help this stuff along.
And just speaking as an analyst, I would say that dealing with many stakeholders and the prioritization, data goes a long way in justifying why you're doing things and why you're doing things in a certain order. So absolutely 100% get that data.
Thank you very much. And just as a last sort of a comment, more than a question, and this is for you, Alex, are you sure that was Connie and not Julia Child?
I think it was like a horrible nightmare combination of Julia Child and Mickey Mouse. Like something from like a closet at the Burbank studio lot. You open the door and it's, ah! And you got to put it away real quick. But thank you.
Thank you, Alex and Lauren. That was quite entertaining and informative. So thank you very much. Thanks for your talk today. And
thank you.
Thanks for sharing your experience.